The Social Security check barely covered the electric bill. After 38 years of marriage, I found myself standing in our kitchen in Tucson, Arizona, staring at a stack of bills that my husband Dennis had always handled, wondering how a retired school teacher with arthritic hands and a 15-year-old Honda Civic was supposed to figure out what came next. I was 66 years old, and the silence in that house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My daughter kept calling from Portland, offering to fly me out, offering to let me move into her guest room. I kept telling her no, not because I didn't want to see her, because leaving that house felt like admitting Dennis was really gone. So instead, I did what women of my generation do when the world falls apart. I found something useful to do with my hands. The job posting at Whitmore Community Hospital was almost embarrassingly simple. Part-time administrative assistant, medical records department, Tuesday through Saturday, 6 in the evening until 11 at night. The pay was modest, the commute was manageable, and most importantly, it would get me out of that kitchen 3 nights a week where I kept setting 2 plates out of habit. The parking situation was the problem nobody mentioned in the job listing. The hospital's main lot closed to non-emergency staff at 10, which meant by the time my shift ended, I was walking half a block to a secondary lot that sat under a burned-out streetlight the facilities team had been promising to fix since February. My daughter called it unacceptable. I called it Tuesday. That's how I met Arthur. The first time I saw him, I almost mistook him for a fixture. He was sitting in a folding chair just inside the glass doors of the hospital's east entrance. A heavy-set man in his early 60s with a gray security uniform that had seen better decades and a thermos so old the paint had worn clean off. His name tag said Arthur. He looked up when I pushed through the doors that first Tuesday night, gave me a single slow nod, and went back to watching the parking lot like it owed him money. I nodded back and kept walking. The second Tuesday, he held the door for me without being asked. The third Tuesday, I noticed his thermos was empty at 8 o'clock, and he still had 3 hours on his shift. Now, I want to be clear about something. I was not trying to be anyone's savior. I was not looking for a project or a cause. I was a 66-year-old widow who had spent 4 decades teaching 7th grade English and had simply never been able to walk past someone who looked tired and overlooked without doing something about it. Call it an occupational hazard. I went to the vending machine down the hall from the records room, bought 2 cups of coffee, and brought one back to the east entrance. I set it on the edge of his desk without making a production of it. He looked at the cup. Then he looked at me. "You didn't have to do that," he said. His voice was low and careful, like a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "Night shift is long," I said. "I know because I'm on it too." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like a door unlocking without quite opening. He wrapped both hands around the cup and said, "Thank you, ma'am." "Margaret," I told him. "My name is Margaret." "Arthur," he said, though I already knew. After that, the coffee became a Tuesday through Saturday ritual. I bring 2 cups out around 8, and we talk for 10 minutes while the hospital hummed around us. At first, it was nothing. Weather, the broken street light, Whether the vending machine's hot chocolate was worse than the coffee or merely differently terrible. But week by week, the way conversations do when people stop performing for each other, it deepened. I learned that Arthur had worked security for 19 years, the last 11 at Whitmore. He had a daughter in Albuquerque he hadn't spoken to properly in 4 years, and a son in the Navy he was proud of in the specific quiet way fathers are proud when they don't quite know how to say it out loud. He had been married once, briefly, in his 30s. He said it the way people say things they have made peace with, even though they haven't. He listened when I talked about Dennis, about learning to cook for one, about the strange guilt of laughing at something on television, and then remembering there was nobody to turn to and share it with. Grief is peculiar, he said one October evening, both of us watching the desert sky turn colors through the glass doors. It doesn't go away. It just gets quieter. I looked at him sideways. You sound like you know. He was quiet for a moment. I know. I didn't push. That was something else 4 decades of seventh graders had taught me. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is leave room for the sentence someone isn't ready to say yet. By November, I'd started bringing food. Nothing elaborate. A sandwich from the deli on Cactus Road, a container of the soup I made too much of on Sundays. The first time I set a paper bag on his desk, he looked at it with an expression I recognized from 38 years of watching Dennis pretend he wasn't moved by things. You're going to spoil me, he said. You work 11 hours and eat vending machine crackers for dinner, I replied. That's not spoiling. That's basic decency. He laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him. It made him look 10 years younger. December came, the way December comes to Tucson, which is to say, not with snow, but with a particular quality of cold that the desert does quietly and completely. I started bringing him hot chocolate on Fridays as a small rebellion against the monotony. He started leaving the east entrance doors propped for the last 30 minutes of my shift, so I didn't have to dig for my badge in the dark parking lot. We had become, without either of us deciding to, people who looked out for each other. It was a Thursday evening, December 12th, when everything shifted. I came through the doors at my usual time to find Arthur already standing, which was unusual. He sat most of the evening, unless there was a reason not to. He was watching the parking lot with an attention that was different from his normal watchfulness, focused, still. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and the look on his face made me slow down. Margaret, he said, and his voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Measured, deliberate. The voice of a man being careful with something. I need to talk to you about something before you go to your desk tonight. My stomach tightened. What's wrong? He didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the parking lot once, then gestured toward the corner of the lobby, away from the doors, away from the windows. Come stand over here, he said. I followed him. He kept his voice low. The man who parks the black Silverado in the far row of the secondary lot, he said. Do you know who he is? I thought. There was a black truck. I'd noticed it the way you notice things that are always there, which is to say without really seeing it. Not by name, I said. I've seen it parked there. He's been there every night you work, Arthur said, for the past 6 weeks. I stared at him. Every night? Every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Not on the nights you're off, just your nights. He said it carefully, watching my face. I started noticing in November. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone on a different shift, but I've been watching the timing. He arrives between 5:30 and 6, which is before you get here. He doesn't leave until after you drive out. The lobby felt suddenly colder. You're certain? I've been keeping a log. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. Neat handwriting, columns of dates and times. Old habit from when I worked the overnight freight yard. You document what you see, gets you in the habit of actually seeing it. I looked at the paper without really reading it. My eyes weren't focusing properly. Has he approached you? I asked. Has he done anything? Not approached. But 2 weeks ago, I watched him walk to the edge of the secondary lot and stand there for about 4 minutes while you were walking to your car. You had your head down, didn't see him. He watched you unlock your car, get in, drive out, and then he got back in his truck. Arthur's jaw was tight, and last Thursday, I went out to the secondary lot on my rounds at 10:30. His truck was parked 2 spaces from yours, not in the far row, 2 spaces. Something cold moved through me. He moved closer. Yes. I thought about my walk to that lot, the burned out street light, the way I always had my keys out early because the parking lot made me slightly uneasy in a way I had told myself was just general city sense. The black truck I had registered and dismissed every single night. Do you know who he is? I asked. Arthur hesitated, just slightly. I ran his plate 3 weeks ago. Against policy technically, but I have a friend on the Tucson PD. Plate comes back to a man named Gary Purcell. The name landed on me strangely, like something half remembered from a dream. Gary Purcell, I repeated slowly. You know him? And then it came. Not a flood, a slow recognition, like a photograph developing. Gary Purcell, heavy-set man, mid-50s, wire-rim glasses. I'd seen him before, not outside, inside the hospital, in the records department, twice in the past 2 months, arguing at the front desk about access to files. Both times, I had been at my station in the back, and both times my supervisor Janet had asked him to leave. He's come to the records department, I said quietly. Twice. I didn't know his name. He was asking for patient files and Janet turned him down. She said he wasn't an authorized requester. Arthur was very still. What kind of files? He asked. I don't know exactly. I wasn't at the front, but I remember Janet being bothered by it. She mentioned it to me afterward. She said it was the second time he'd tried. I paused, something assembling itself slowly in the back of my mind. Arthur, 2 weeks ago, Janet started an internal audit. She found discrepancies in how certain files were being accessed, records that had been pulled and not properly logged. She put me on the audit team because I have the seniority. The lobby was very quiet. Does anyone outside your department know you're on that audit team? Arthur asked. Opened my mouth, closed it, thought about the departmental email that had gone out, the one that listed audit team members by name. That went to the whole administrative floor. It was in an email, I said, a department-wide email, 2.5 weeks ago. Arthur looked at me steadily. That's 2 weeks before he moved his truck closer to yours. The floor felt uncertain under my feet. "Margaret," Arthur said, and his voice was very calm in the specific way that people are calm when they are working very hard to keep someone else calm. "I need you to not go to your car tonight after your shift." "Where am I supposed to go?" "I'm going to drive you. And before that, we're going to go talk to the charge nurse supervisor on duty. And then we're going to call the police. Tonight. Right now. Before your shift starts." Arthur, I don't even know what he's done. I don't know what the files were for or what the audit has found. This could be nothing. This could be Margaret. He said my name quietly, but with a weight that stopped me. "I need to tell you something." He looked past me for a moment, toward nothing in particular, the way people look when they're deciding how much to say. "4 years ago," he began, "I worked a security job at an apartment complex on the east side. Decent place, mostly families and seniors. There was a tenant in Building C, a woman in her late 40s, recently divorced. She came to me 3 times in 1 month and told me she thought her ex-husband was watching the building, sitting in a car across the street. She said it felt wrong." He paused. "I told her I would look into it. I made a note of it. I drove through the parking lot a few extra times. And I told myself that she was probably stressed from the divorce, that divorced women sometimes have a hard time adjusting, that there was no real evidence of anything." The lobby was absolutely silent. "He broke into her apartment 6 weeks after she first came to me," Arthur said. "She survived, but just." He met my eyes. I handed in my resignation the next day. I spent 2 years telling myself I couldn't have known. And then I stopped telling myself that because it wasn't true. She had told me. She had come to me 3 times and told me something was wrong, and I had patted her on the head and done nothing. He straightened. His shoulders were very square. "I've been a good security guard for the past 4 years," he said quietly. "I have been paying attention the way I should have been paying attention then. And I am telling you right now that what I have watched this man do for 6 weeks in that parking lot is not nothing. So please, let me do my job tonight." My eyes were burning. I nodded. I couldn't speak. 20 minutes later, we were sitting across from a Tucson Police Department detective named Reyes in a small room that smelled like burned coffee and carpet cleaner. Arthur spread his log on the table. 6 weeks of dates, times, descriptions, license plate, the progression from far row to 2 spaces away from my car. The detective read it without expression. "And you're on an internal audit at the hospital," Detective Reyes said to me. "I am. We found approximately 40 patient records that were improperly accessed over the past 18 months. The access logs show they were pulled by someone with a temporary contractor credential that expired 8 months ago." The detective looked up. "Do you know who the contractor was?" "Not yet. The audit isn't complete, but Janet, my supervisor, said she was going to have a name by end of week." Detective Reyes wrote something. "And this man, Purcell, came to your department twice requesting files." "Requesting files he wasn't authorized to receive," I said, "and was turned away both times." "Do you know what he does for work?" "I don't." The detective turned to her computer. We sat quietly. Arthur's hands were folded on the table. After 2 minutes, Detective Reyes looked up with an expression that had sharpened. Gary Purcell is a licensed insurance claims adjuster, she said. Freelance. He contracts with several smaller regional health insurance providers. The room shifted. I heard my own voice from very far away. The files that were improperly accessed. They were patient files, billing records. Yes, the detective said. If someone with access to patient billing records was feeding information to an insurance adjuster, I said slowly, they could be flagging fraudulent claims or manufacturing them, or, I stopped, or identifying which legitimate claims could be disputed and denied. Detective Reyes finished, with insider information about which records existed and which didn't. 18 months, 40 files, patients who were probably elderly, probably on fixed incomes, probably the last people who would have the energy or resources to fight a denied claim. The contractor credential, Arthur said quietly, the one that was used to pull those files. Someone inside the hospital created that access. Detective Reyes looked at him. That's what we'll need to determine. What happened next happened quickly and without my involvement, which is both the relief and the helplessness of being the person a crime is built around rather than the person solving it. Detective Reyes made calls. A second detective arrived. Arthur and I gave formal statements. I called Janet from a borrowed phone and told her not to send any further audit communications by department-wide email. Her silence on the other end of the line told me she understood immediately why. They put me in a hotel on Speedway Boulevard that night under a name that wasn't mine. And I sat in a room with a view of a parking structure and tried to understand how a man whose name I hadn't known 3 hours ago had apparently been orbiting my life for 6 weeks, waiting to see how much I knew. Arthur called at 7 in the morning, not from an official number, his personal cell. They arrested him, he said, last night. They found a laptop in his truck, emails between him and someone in the hospital's IT department, a man named Fowler who created the contractor access and was feeding Purcell information about which files to target. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. How much? The detective said preliminary numbers suggest close to $300,000 in fraudulent claim manipulation over 18 months. Mostly elderly patients on Medicare supplement plans. Small enough denials per person that most of them didn't fight it. Thought about those patients, people my age, people older, receiving letters telling them a claim had been denied, deciding it wasn't worth the fight, paying out of pocket for something they'd been promised. They're going to need the audit, I said. Everything we've documented. Janet already called them, Arthur said. She'd been suspicious of Fowler for months, apparently. Couldn't prove anything. Your audit was going to get there. And that was why, I understood then, Gary Purcell had been sitting in that parking lot. Not because I knew anything yet, because it was only a matter of time before I did. Arthur picked me up from the hotel himself, his own car, a sensible 10-year-old Camry with a pine tree air freshener and a rosary hanging from the mirror. We drove through Tucson in the pale winter morning, and neither of us spoke for a long time. How did you know? I finally asked. I mean, really know it was something to take seriously. His hands were easy on the wheel. I told you why. I know what you told me. I'm asking how you live with having learned it that way. He was quiet for what felt like a long time. "You don't stop living with it," he said finally. "You just decide what to do with it. Some people learn something terrible and they fold up. Protect themselves. Stop paying attention because paying attention is how you got hurt." He paused. I decided to pay attention harder. It doesn't fix what happened, but it's the only thing I have to offer. I looked at his profile, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of watching things other people didn't bother to watch. "You saved my life," I said. He shook his head slightly. "I did my job, finally." "Arthur," he glanced at me, "you did more than your job. You kept a log for 6 weeks because you were worried. You called your friend at the PD. You walked me to that room yourself instead of just telling me to be careful." I held his gaze. "That's not a job. That's someone deciding another person matters." He looked back at the road. His jaw worked. He didn't say anything, but I saw him reach up and touch the rosary briefly, and I understood that to be its own kind of answer. The investigation took 11 weeks. Gary Purcell and a hospital IT employee named Fowler were charged with wire fraud, healthcare fraud, and conspiracy. I testified in a deposition that February, sitting across a long table from lawyers who were very polished and very well dressed. And I told them exactly what I had seen, what I had heard, and what I had documented. Arthur testified too. His log, all 6 weeks of it, entered into evidence. Purcell pleaded guilty in April, 14 years. Fowler accepted a plea for 8. I went back to work in the records department the week after the arrest. Janet had brought in temporary staff to cover my shifts during the investigation, and when I came back, my desk had a small succulent on it with a note that said, simply, "Glad you're still here." I didn't know who had left it, and I didn't need to. Arthur and I kept having coffee together. On Tuesday through Saturday evenings, he stopped bringing his old paint strip thermos because I had given him a new one for Christmas. Dark green with his name on it in the kind of font that looks like it belongs on an old Western storefront. He acted like it was excessive. He used it every single night. In March, his daughter called him. She had seen a small news item about the arrest online, something a local Tucson paper had run, with a quote from the investigating detective that mentioned a hospital security guard whose diligent documentation had been pivotal. She had called the hospital to ask if it was her father. They had transferred her to his extension. He told me about it the following Tuesday, standing at the east entrance with his new green thermos and an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Something open, tender, and slightly stunned, the way faces look when they've been given something they had stopped expecting. "She wants to come visit," he said. "Bring the kids, my grandchildren." He said the word like he was testing whether it was real. "I have 2. I've seen pictures, but I've never—" He stopped. "When is she coming?" I asked. "Spring break," he said. "April." I squeezed his arm. He covered my hand briefly with his and then looked back at the parking lot in that way of his, watching everything, letting nothing go unnoticed. "She said she saw the article and she thought, 'That's him,'" Arthur told me. "She said she'd always known I was that kind of man, the kind who pays attention. She just thought he stopped caring about her." His voice was very controlled. "I never stopped. I just didn't know how to show it in a way that reached her. You do now, I said. He nodded, took a slow sip of coffee. She said something that he paused. She said, Dad, you protected a stranger the way I always needed you to protect me. And I'm proud of you for it. I just needed you to know that. We stood there in the glow of the east entrance, the Tucson night spread out behind the glass. And I thought about the strange, crooked way things find their way to where they need to be. A widow too stubborn to leave her house. A security guard too watchful to look away. A cup of coffee bought from a vending machine on a quiet Tuesday evening. My daughter flew in from Portland that spring to visit. The first time she'd seen me since the arrest became news. She sat in my kitchen and looked at me with a complicated expression. The one children get when they realize their parents have been having a life outside of being their parents. Mom, she said, you testified in a federal fraud case. I did, I agreed, and poured her coffee. And the security guard who helped you? Arthur. You brought him dinner for months before any of this happened. He worked 11-hour shifts and ate crackers from a vending machine. She shook her head slowly. You just can't help yourself, can you? Thought about that for a moment, about what it means to see someone, really see them, not as a uniform or a title or a fixture you pass on your way somewhere else, but as a person carrying a full weight of history and loss and quiet hope. I thought about how that simple act, the decision to treat someone as visible and worth knowing, had set into motion a chain of events that ended with two fraudsters in federal custody and an old security guard getting a phone call from his daughter. No, I said finally, I really can't. That's the thing nobody tells you about kindness. It isn't strategic. You can't aim it and expect a specific return. You can't bring a man coffee because you're hoping he'll save your life someday, because that's not kindness. That's an investment. And people can feel the difference. You bring the coffee because the night is long and his thermos is empty, and you were raised to understand that small dignities matter. That's all. That's the whole thing. And sometimes, because the world is strange and human beings are capable of extraordinary things when they feel seen, that cup of coffee becomes the reason someone keeps a 6-week log, keeps a careful record, makes a phone call to an old friend on the police force, stands up from his folding chair and says, I need to tell you something before you go to your desk tonight. I'm 67 now, still working Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, still in the records department at Whitmore, though they've promoted me to senior coordinator and fixed the streetlight in the secondary lot, which I take as something close to justice. Last week, a new hire came into the department. Young man, maybe 22, clearly overwhelmed, sitting at his temporary desk at 9 o'clock with the particular hollow expression of someone wondering if they've made a mistake. I went to the vending machine, bought 2 cups, set one on his desk. He looked up at me the way Arthur looked up at me that first time, like he wasn't sure what to do with it. Night shift's long, I said. It gets easier. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded and went back to my work. I don't know what that cup of coffee will become. Maybe nothing. Maybe he'll finish his shift and go home and forget I existed by morning. That's fine. That's allowed. Kindness doesn't come with a receipt. But maybe he'll remember it on a night when he's tired and the work is thankless and someone near him needs someone to pay attention. Maybe he'll think of it when he has a choice to look away from something that makes him uneasy or to look at it more carefully instead. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.